So you're okay. For regarding time management, we've got 1.5 hours for presentations and Q&A, and I would suggest that each speaker is allotted about 15 to 20 minutes for his and her talk. If you stick closer to the 15-minute marks, then we've got more time for questions. If everybody sticks to the 20-minute marks, we've got about 5 to 10 minutes Q&A time at the end of the session. And if anybody's got questions, oh, there are attendees. Hello, good morning. If anybody's got questions, please put them in the chat, and then I'll take them up at the end of the session and put them to the individual panelists. So, brilliant. As the first speaker, I'd like to welcome Jacques Percebois and François Bémade from the University of Montpellier, who will give a talk on the assessment of renewable energy sources impacts on the nuclear power fleet, in particular in France, and in the light of the ongoing discussions of the EU taxonomy and the role of nuclear energy, and the EU's Commission's Fit for 55 package. I reckon that is a very, very interesting research topic, and I'm looking forward to your talk. Please, you have the word.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We are one more time quite happy to present our paper to Energy Symposium. So the topic is about the assessment of energy sources impacts on nuclear power, especially in France. The European Commission has adopted a package of proposals to make the European Union's climate, energy and land use, transport and taxation policies fit for reducing net greenhouse gas emission by at least 55% by 2013 compared to 1990 levels. And as energy production and use accounts for 75% of European emission, the Renewable Energy Directive will set an increased target to produce about 40% of our energy from renewable sources by end of 2030. If we talk about France, the share of gross electricity is mainly dominated by nuclear power, as its share is about 70%, whereas the renewables, and especially wind and solar power, represents just 8.5% of this electricity generation. So the electricity of France, which is operating the world's largest fleet of nuclear power, is challenged. Reactor is challenged by this growing market share of renewable energy sources, and especially wind and solar. And as the chart shows, there is a growing installation of capacity for wind and for solar in France, and now we have about more than 25 gigawatts of installed capacities, and the share of power which is covered by these sources doesn't exceed 8.5, as we have already said. But whereas nuclear energy covered sometimes more than 100% of power needs for France, and the extra production is exported to neighboring countries. So our research question consists on assessing the impacts of this energy renewable, the renewable energy sources on nuclear power production generation in France. So as we know, the renewable energy sources have priority for grid access, as it participates in the auction process at zero marginal cost, so they could replace other energy sources with higher marginal cost. This have an impact of creating a downward effect on equilibrium electricity prices the so-called merit order effects. Many authors has talked and carried out empirical research in this topic, especially Worsborg, Keterer, Claudius, and modestly the co-authors Persobra and Benman in many papers published in this topic. That the nuclear plants could be a victim of this crowding effect resulting from the merit order. That's why the topic deserves to be explored, and that is the topic of our paper today. So we will carry out an empirical analysis by using hourly data for nuclear power generation, for wind and photovoltaic generation, and for load, the power demand coming from France. And as the cards show here, we have quite a clear seasonal profile of load and of nuclear. We have two big seasons, a summer season and a winter season. And there is this two seasons. The nuclear shows its ability to follow load, and there is a behavior of load following coming from nuclear plants in France. But when we explore the correlation between nuclear generation and wind, we see that the wind is evenly distributed across the months of the year, but solar has an opposite profile, because the solar is the generation of solar, photovoltaic solar reached its peak in the summer season, when the nuclear plant is at its level, slowest level of production. And when we take into account the imports, especially coming from Germany, we see that there is a clear seasonal profile. That means that the French electricity system imports a lot of electricity from Germany during winter season, as the needs is quite high. And if we explore the descriptive statistics, we can see that when the load reaches its maximum level, about 100 gigawatt, you see that nuclear electricity can be able to have a share of more than 60%, whereas sometimes solar and wind cannot feed in the network enough electricity to meet demand needs. So the empirical model that we will use consists on make an estimate of this equation. So we will make a regression. We will regress load, seasonally adjusted solar and solar production, wind production, and we will add an autoregressive parameter to adjust to the stochastic behavior of nuclear production. And the results are shown in this table. And as we can see, we see that the correlation coefficient of load is positive, showing that the more the load is important, the more nuclear should adjust for this high level of load, and so the nuclear generation will increase. However, the relationship with nuclear and with solar and wind and imports is negative, and the most important impact, negative impacts, come from solar. So solar has the highest impacts on nuclear generation, but the wind have a negative too, and we can be confident in our results, as the R squared is about 95%. That means that our model is quite robust, and it shows the negative impact of renewable on nuclear generation.
Yeah. As a conclusion, we may observe that the French electricity system must increasingly deal with the two problems simultaneously. First, lack of electricity during peak periods, and too much fatal renewable electricity during off-peak periods. For instance, in this year, in 2021, the availability of nuclear power is relatively low, not only because of the injections of renewables, but also because of the health crisis, which has delayed the maintenance of many reactors. For the future, we have the following problem: how to maintain a wholesale market based on marginal cost with an electricity mix based on zero marginal cost for renewable electricity and low variable cost for nuclear. How to finance fixed cost with such a system? Can the capacity market, which remunerates the kilowatt, replace the wholesale market, that is the energy-only market, which remunerates the kilowatt hour? Consideration should be given to reforming the electricity market in Europe, in France in particular, to replace the merit order based on marginal cost, either by a merit order based on average cost, or by a capacity market, or even by a single buyer type of tendering system. It's a big challenge for the future, and such a reform is now questionable in France, and the French government considers that it's a priority. Thanks.
Thank you very much. I just put on my video. You were, sorry, quicker than I thought. There you go. Are there, I mean, we're pretty good in time, so if there are any immediate questions by the audience, you could put them in the chat and then we can answer one or two questions right away. That's not the case.
Can I propose a question to Jack?
Yeah, of course.
I hope Jack will remember me. What kind of possible mechanism do you prefer? Capacity market or capacity payment?
Jack, you're muted.
Sorry. In my opinion, capacity market is probably the best solution. But we have different solutions to explore, of course. Probably a capacity market is the same solution, but in Europe, we have a problem because the system is very different from one country to another. For instance, we have not the same system in Germany, in Spain, in Sweden, in France, and it's necessary to harmonize the system of capacity market, because, for instance, in Spain, in my opinion, is a payment, capacity payment. In Germany, it's reserves, payment of capacity also. In UK, in France, is a market with capacity system. Yeah, but it is a good question, but we have to harmonize the system in Europe because we have not exactly the same, and to have a single market in Europe, a single market for electricity in Europe is necessary to have about the same system for to pay the capacity.
Thanks.
Maybe I can add one question to that, because the result that you showed, I mean, it's based on the merit order effect, but nonetheless, it clearly shows that the more renewables there are in the system, the less there is the bankability of nuclear power plants. And now the French government has put forward this initiative of increasing the French nuclear power fleet and also launch investments into smaller reactors and make the nuclear power the backbone of the French energy system. So how do you assess this contrasting or this trade-off that the Commission wants to increase the number or the capacity of renewables, at the same time that has a negative impact on the bankability, and France wants to expand the nuclear fleet? who's going to invest in nuclear power plants if they're crowded out of the market like that? Is that your third conclusion, that in order to facilitate that, market design has to be reformed fundamentally?
Okay, so I will answer about because EDF belongs to the public sector.
Yeah.
So that is the government that will invest in the new nuclear capacity in France and in small modular reactor. So I agree with you that it is a crowding out effect, but the governments and the public sector take into account this public, and it will manage this crowding out effects. But we know that in the coming years we will be in need of high capacity, installed capacity of power sector, because there is a switch coming from natural gas, from electric vehicles, and from electrification of many consumption needs coming from firms, from individuals, from residential sector. So the consumption, the power consumption will increase in the coming years. So although we could install new nuclear capacity, we will be in need in much more installed capacity coming from renewables. So we can manage to have a smart electric power mix, reconciliating renewables and nuclear, because the two nuclear technology are green technology for power production.
In fact, it is not possible to think that it's possible to finance nuclear programs with PPA in France. It's necessary to have public funds. But for private investment, if we wish to have private investment, it's absolutely necessary to obtain that the nuclear energy will included in the European taxonomy. The reason why the stake of the green taxonomy is very important for the French government.
Thank you very much. Okay, then the rest of the question we postpone to the end of the session. Jacques-François, thank you very much for your talk, and we'll go on to the next speaker. That should have been Arushi Mahajan, but I don't see her in the panel. So a question to the hosts: will she join? Do we have any news of her, or is that talk cancelled? We don't know. Anyway, then let's proceed to the next speaker on the list. That's Francesco Guli. Francesco Guli is a professor of applied economics at Bocconi University in Milan, where he teaches energy and environmental economics and policy, with a focus on energy policy and sustainability other than the economics of renewables and energy saving technologies. And he will give a talk on a comparison of the social costs of decarbonization, electrification versus green fuels, in particular biomethane. Francesco, the floor is yours, please.
Thank you. Let me share the file. Well, I hope you can see my presentation, and let me thank the organizer of this important seminar, symposium, organized by the Association of Energy Economists. The title of my presentation is reported in this first slide: comparing social cost of energy supply, decarbonization, electrification against green fuels, and in particular biomethane. I think that a good way of resuming in a few minutes the content of my presentation is explaining the title word by word, beginning from what we intend as energy supply. Energy supply includes a lot of energy uses, but we focus on thermal uses, representing a significant share of final energy consumption. As you know, decarbonization is very common word today, and it can be intended as the effort to abate CO2 emission in order to achieve the decarbonization targets, that is in order to fight global warming and to mitigate global warming. Social cost means that we are interested in the CO2 abatement cost charged to the society as a whole. Therefore, our vision is not a private vision, but a social vision. And electrification is the technical solution where electricity is directly used in order to produce thermal energy. And biomethane, as you know, is a green fuel, carbon neutral fuel obtained by converting organic materials. The objective of my presentation is to compare these two kinds of technical solution in order to understand, to check which is preferable from the social welfare point of view. Why this topic is important? Biomethane is a scarce renewable source of energy. This means, this implies that the traditional economic problem arises, that is how to allocate this scarce resource in order to maximize the social welfare, in order to be efficient, where efficient allocation means that we have to look for the technical solution able to minimize the abatement cost. And in our opinion, for this purpose, two steps of analysis should be implemented. The first step is an infrastructural analysis that is comparing electrification and biomethane for thermal uses, especially for cogeneration with high efficiency, in order to understand which is the best solution from the social point of view. And if so, if biomethane is preferable, then we can move towards the intersectoral analysis in order to check whether it is better to allocate biomethane to thermal uses, cogeneration, or allocate it to other sectors, such as, for example, firstly, the transportation sector. This presentation focuses only on the first step, which is the necessary condition to go to the second step, that is to understand whether it is better allocating biomethane in thermal sector or in the transportation sector. For this purpose, we simulate the following application and the solutions. With regard to application, we take into account a medium large size industrial customer close to a small medium city urban district. This is a solution making district heating combined with cogeneration very suitable. And given this application, we simulate three technical solutions: the base solution, solution one, including a cogeneration plant combined with district heating, but without the use of renewable energy, that is without abatement. The second solution is abatement, is with abatement and based on electrification of thermal uses, where electricity is provided by renewable energies. The third solution includes a cogeneration plant combined with the district heating, but this time biomethane for the cogeneration plant is used so that Also, this solution is with abatement. What is our objective? Is to understand which is the best solution with abatement in terms of efficiency. Thus, we have to compare the solution with the abatement to the solutions without abatement. And this comparison is based on the estimation of the so-called levelized cost of CO2 abatement. To estimate the levelized cost of abatement, we use the approach generally adopted to calculate the levelized cost of electricity. This levelized cost of electricity is the break-even point, that is the price of electricity such that the revenues deriving from the sale of electricity are able to recover the generating cost given a specific discount rate. This methodology is applied to calculate the levelized cost of abatement, where this levelized cost of abatement is given by the unit damage cost, such that social revenues, which are given by the reduced damage cost for societies deriving from the reduction of CO2 emission, this unit damage cost is able to recover the cost of CO2 abatement, which is given by the difference between the cost with the abatement and the cost without abatement. To apply this formula reported in the top of the slide, to apply this formula, we make the following assumptions. About applications and solution, all quantity variables in the formula are normalized in the sense that they are referred to 1 gigawatt-hour of final thermal consumption, final thermal supply. And in the case of cogeneration, the industrial self-consumption of electricity is, and the imported and export electricity to the grid are accounted for as negative cost, that is avoid the supply and the consumption, avoid the cost of supply and consumption. And fundamental, with regard to renewable supply, we assume virtual markets where there is not a direct connection between the producers of renewable energy and the consumers of renewable energy. But consumers can prove that they are using renewable energy by purchasing the guarantees of origin in a specific market or by means bilateral transactions. In addition, producers of renewables are subsidized on the basis of specific mechanisms, but notice that the expenses related to the purchasing of the guarantee of origin in the case of biomethane are not accounted for, because we assume that the producers of biomethane are paid on the basis of a mechanism, incentivizing mechanism based on an all-inclusive tariff. Finally, in solution 3, cogeneration can allow us to save biomethane. This biomethane, this quantity of saved biomethane can used elsewhere, so implying a reduction of CO2 emission elsewhere, and this benefit in terms of CO2 emission reduction is accounted for in our formulation. Finally, a few words about carbon permits and the energy saving certificates. that is the white certificates, the expenses, solution one, the expenses related to the need of purchasing the carbon permits are not accounted for, as they are already internalized in our formulation, are already internalized in the total damage cost. And the revenues related to white certificate allocation are not accounted for as well, because white certificates are paid by final consumers of electricity and natural gas through the corresponding distribution tariffs. Given these assumptions and the formula related to the estimation of the levelized cost of the CO2 abatement, we obtained the following results reported in the top of this slide. As you can see, the solution using biomethane to abate emissions is largely preferable to electrification. The abatement cost is around the half than that related to electrification. And this result is now robust, as you can see by looking at the cumulative distribution in the bottom of this slide, the probability that the abatement cost by using the biomethane compared the probability that this cost could be lower than the cost with electrification is very low. But another important result should be pointed out, that is the abatement cost with biomethane is lower than the carbon price. This means that it is preferable from the social point of view, directly abating emissions rather than to purchase the right to emit CO2. By concluding, firstly, in the thermal sector, in thermal uses, and in particular in cogeneration, the direct use of a green fuel such as biomethane is preferable to electrification, and this result legitimates us to continue our work in order to understand whether it is better to allocate the biomethane to the transportation sector or to thermal uses. Secondly, as I said before, the abatement cost is lower than carbon price. This means that currently carbon markets are working well because they are able to incentivize, to support the direct abatement of the emissions, for example, by using biomethane in the cogeneration plant. Finally, the current regulation, Italian regulation about biomethane seems to be consistent with these results. Formally, in fact, the Italian regulation allocated incentives only to biomethane used in transportation sector. The new scheme of regulation extended this possibility to other sectors different of transportation, consistently with the results of this work. It remains to understand whether there will be a scale of priority, that is whether the transportation sector is first, then the other possible allocation to biomethane. In other words, whether the consumption of biomethane, incentivized biomethane in other sectors is residual compared to the use of biomethane in the target of the use of biomethane in the transportation sector. That's all. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much for the, wait, I just switch on my video. So at least some idea of conference feeling can come up. Thank you very much for that interesting talk. I've got one immediate question. If you can go back to your results slide, slide 7. You have this cumulative distribution. Could you explain again what is shown in this graph? Because that is, as far as I understand, the main result in which you say that in the case that you investigated, the use of biomethane has lower social costs or is preferable to electrification.
If you take value on the horizontal axis, the corresponding value on the vertical axis, the probability that the abatement cost would be lower than this value. And as you can see, this probability is higher in the case of biomethane than in the case of electricity.
Yeah, but nonetheless, there is this crossover for very low abatement cost. So that means that it really depends on the actual level of the abatement cost whether biomethane is preferable to electrification, although it looks as.
Yes, electrification can be, the cost of abatement by using electrification can be lower than that corresponding to the use of biomethane. But as you can see, cross point is very, very, very low. And then the corresponding probability that the abatement cost by using biomethane could be higher than that of electrification, corresponding to electrification, is very low.
Okay. Thank you very much. Very interesting talk. Are there any questions from the audience, as seen in the chat? Not at the moment. So again, Francesco, thank you very much for the talk.
Thank you.
And then we come to the third talk, which was actually scheduled as the fourth. The speaker is Animesh Singh, who is a last year student at the School of Energy and Environment at the City University of Hong Kong. And he's talking about the techno-economic analysis of blockchain-enabled rooftop solar photovoltaic-based peer-to-peer energy market using agent-based models. And I can well remember a couple of years ago, both of the main keywords in this title, blockchain and peer-to-peer networks. They really spiked a wave of new business models and a lot of research in Europe, in particular in Germany. So I'm very much looking forward to your talk and the results, the model that you investigated and the results you're presenting. Please.
All right. Thank you very much, Maximilian, for the introduction. And I hope you can hear me. I'll share my screen.
Yes, we can hear you and see your screen.
Great. Yes. So right. So I would first like to thank all the participants for attending the conference today. A very good evening to all of you from Hong Kong. I'm Animesh and I'm an undergraduate student at the City University of Hong Kong. And today I'll be talking about my very first research topic, which is about a blockchain-enabled rooftop solar energy market and the analysis using an agent-based model. So the title is indeed very long, but frankly speaking, the idea behind the research is quite simple. So when I started working on this topic with my co-authors, Dr. Nalapaneni Manoj Kumar and Dr. Shauritesh Chopra, we started with the goal of introducing a very convenient system for energy consumers in the market. So firstly, I'll give you a brief introduction of our topic, followed by the system design, and then we will look at the methodology. And finally, I'll show you the results of our research along with the conclusions. So we all know that the distributed energy resources are on the rise, specifically talking about rooftop solar across the globe. Many countries have adopted these systems, as you just pointed out, Maximilian. This has not only led to an increase in investments, but also interest amongst the end users to produce and consume their own energy. So the purpose of our research is to explore the performance of peer-to-peer market formed by these users through an agent-based model to simulate real-world solar energy transactions using a very popular agent-based modeling tool called NetLogo. So let me start by explaining our peer-to-peer network using a 4-node system example. As you can see on your screen, this scenario consists of 2 households in blue color that are considered as consumers here, and 2 households with solar rooftop systems installed, and they are prosumers. To give them a collective identity in general, in agent-based modeling, we call them agents. So these agents are connected to each other through a blockchain platform, which means that one agent is connected to all the 3 other agents in the network. These agents can participate in energy transactions through the blockchain platform that will be in use by providing relevant inputs such as willingness to accept, willingness to pay, supply, demand values, and so on. And a full-fledged system can consist of multiple networks like this one. Excuse me. So to give you a clear idea of how one transaction happens in the system, let me show you the system design and a flowchart. So a proper network may consist of prosumers, consumers, an electricity distribution system, a blockchain platform, and possibly a few other agents such as a retailer, regulator, or a facilitator. So these agents are connected to one another and help carry out the transfer of energy and currency in the market. So one consumer and one prosumer will participate per transaction, and they will be connected through the blockchain platform wherein they can make requests. Accordingly, the electricity distribution system will be notified and the consumer will get the desired amount of energy supplied by the prosumer. Both the prosumers and consumers can store their energy in their batteries, which is a very important part of an ideal network. Now, if there is some amount of energy that is unsold and that cannot be stored by the prosumers, and that is the energy in excess, of course. So this can be sold to the grid at the buyback rate, and that can then be sold to consumers by the grid at retail price. So this is the system design, the flow chart that I just talked about. So moving on to the methodology, now that we understand the process, we firstly require a wide range of data that will help the software run and calculate appropriate results. This includes complex weather data that can help determine the generation potential and energy output of a PV system, market behavior to estimate willingness to accept and willingness to pay values, supply and demand quantities of the agents, and so on. And these factors heavily depend on, the market heavily depends on the values of these parameters. So this data can then be used to perform generation and load demand assessment, which is then fed into the software. And it is important to note that we will possibly get different values for different locations depending upon things like living conditions, rooftop size, energy consumption profiles, because the weather might be different in different locations. So, you use air conditioners and heaters at a different rate and things like that. So the agent-based model then analyzes the data and produces results that include average willingness to accept, average willingness to pay, average transaction price, total energy sold, money earned, and so on. So here's what the agent-based model sort of looks like. It is a screenshot of what we have been working on. So we use the same framework as the bidding markets program available in the NetLogo library, but relevant changes were made in the program to make it suitable for our use. Now, data extracted from NetLogo was then analyzed using Python and Excel to generate the required results. Now, I'll quickly show you the results of our experiment, but here, just to tell you that, just to explain you what you can see on your screen, the image that you can see, it consists of green arrow-like structures and red arrow-like structures. The green structures are sellers and the red structures are buyers, and they are connected to each other through a link, which should initially be blue in color, but when a transaction happens, it turns into yellow. So the yellow lines that you can see appear after a transaction happens. So let's look at the results now. We considered 3 scenarios, which are variation in energy generation, peer behavior, and scalability, which I will explain in a bit. So for the first scenario, we varied the generation value of agents. For load, we used the average kilowatt hour energy consumption per household in India, and it was around 5 kilowatt hours in the summer of 2020. That was around between March to May, I believe. And so we kept the upper limit as 10 kilowatt hours, just as an example. So the agents in the market generate, the load of the agents in the market is somewhere between 1 to 10 kilowatt hours. So for this particular case, we found that the demand remaining was 0, which is the goal of the model, because you want the demand to be satisfied of all the consumers at the end of the bidding cycle. And the ideal ratio of the load to generation in this example was somewhere between 1:3 and 1:4. So for analyzing the other 2 cases, we used 1:3.5 as a suitable case. Now for the second scenario, which is peer behavior, we took into account the fact that different agents may behave differently in the market. In our model, we analyzed markets with 4 types of behavior: normal, desperate, random, and mix of all. So the willingness to accept and the willingness to pay values were varied after every transaction in the market as per the behavior of the agents. We found that when the agents are desperate, desperate to take part in transactions, they exchange energy at the lowest average price when compared to the other 3 types of behavior. Now for the third scenario, we tried to look at the scalability of this model. When the population of agents increased, it was found that the average transaction price remained between the maximum and minimum price allowed, which we defined before running the model. And this was around 2 to 5 units per kilowatt hours. And that also just as an example. So it also took more cycles, that is more time to finish all possible transactions, and more supply was remaining with sellers after the bidding cycle as the population of the agents increased. So in conclusion, we saw that the ratio of load to generation plays a very important role in fulfilling the demand of all the agents in the market. Higher the generation of the sellers, greater the amount of energy they can sell in the market, and hence higher the probability of meeting the demand of all the buyers increases. And that is what we ideally want. Now, the efficiency of the market also depends upon the behavior of the agents. If the agents are desperate enough, they will share energy at low prices and also at a faster rate, so the bidding cycle can end quicker. And of course, you'll get different types of values for different types of behavior. Now, as far as the average price is concerned, it heavily depends upon the average willingness to accept and average willingness to pay values, the population, and so on. So in our program, we kept stern lower and upper limits for the price, so that when we increase the population, average price remain between the upper and lower bounds, which tells us that if we do not allow the agents to misbehave, in the sense that we do not allow them to quote unrealistic prices, the market can be scalable. This can be done with the help of a facilitator or smart contract constraints in the blockchain platform. And it is also important to note that this is just one case. You may get different values for different locations with different input data, and hence the results can show variation. So in future, what our group is going to do is we are planning on conducting a proper techno-economic analysis of a rooftop market in a particular community in India. And we'll gather relevant data such as rooftop size, living conditions, and so on, to see how well the system really works. And hopefully we'll be able to share that with you very soon. So with that, I would like to end my presentation. Thank you.
Thank you very much for this interesting talk. I just start up my video and yes, you can see. Are there any questions from the audience? No, not that I can see. But then please allow me to ask a couple of questions. Because I find this topic very, very interesting. I've worked myself on not on an energy economic scientific way for peer-to-peer markets, but rather on the political implementations and the questions they pose for market design. And so I came across a lot of different proposals from people to implement peer-to-peer markets in particular in Germany or in Europe. And as you know from the literature, there are people who believe that this is the model to go, and there are people who believe that this would destroy the market, at least the European market as such. What I found interesting in your results were actually two things, and maybe you can elaborate on these a little bit further. The one was that the scalability issue. When you increase the market size, the amount of remaining supply increased linearly. What is the reason for that, or did I misunderstand the mechanism behind that? Because to me that sounds that the more people you have in the market, the less peer-to-peer allocation of electricity you get.
Oh, right. So that's an interesting question, actually. But the case in the results that I showed you was the load, the limit of the load was constant. So it was 1 to 10. And the generation of the cellars was varied from...
Okay.
Right. So as you increase the generation of the sellers, so what sellers are selling is the difference between their generation and their load.
Yeah.
So they are consuming their own energy and they are selling their excess. Okay. So because the load was somewhat constant, and the energy was increased, so the difference between the generation and load also increased in the same manner. Okay,
of course, and so there is no additional right. Consumption due to the surplus generation of the sellers.
Right. So because we of course increase the population, in due course the sum of the energy excess of energy amongst the sellers also increased, and yeah, yeah,
integrating over a constant.
Yes, yeah.
Okay, that's interesting. The second question is related to the dependence of the prices on the size of the market. So I used to work for the European Energy Exchange here in Germany, so I know about how auction models work and how price formation in the power markets actually work, and so both in continuous and auction models and stuff like that. And what we realized, or what is that's common sense in the market, is that the larger the market, the better the price, which means that there is the theoretical optimal equilibrium price, and the smaller the market, the less likely you are to hit that price exactly. So if you want to look at it from a distributional point of view, the variation or the standard deviation in that distribution is much bigger. The volatility is much bigger in a smaller market compared to a bigger market. Now, in your result, you showed that even in a very small market, the price immediately converges to I don't know what unit that was, but to a certain number, and then when you increase it, it only slightly fluctuates. So there is no effect of the size of the market on the quality of the price finding mechanism. Is that due to the fact that you actually chose one generation technology and probably one consumption profile in your model?
Right. So the question that you posed at the end. So yes, the generation profiles and the load profiles were actually considered on one type of technology. So solar, of course, has different types, crystalline and so on. So that should ideally be done, like the forecasting of solar panels should ideally be done considering the kinds of solar panels that the consumer has, and that will of course have an effect on the generation and load profiles. But and that is what we want to do in our future research when we gather proper data of one particular location, the rooftop size of different households, which are of course not going to be the same. So the price, why it remained relatively constant, it did fluctuate a bit, but it remained relatively constant here, was perhaps because we treated the consumers as the same. So in ideal conditions, their energy consumption profiles can be different, their living conditions can be different, and how they respond to the market can be different. In our case, we did include the possibility of their behavior being changed, and perhaps that did fluctuate the price to some extent. But we also found that that did show that the market can be scaled to some extent, but also that was probably because the upper and lower limits of the allowed transaction price were very stern. So 2 to 5 units per kilowatt, and in our program we did not allow the consumers or the sellers to quote a price beyond that. So that also tells us that the scalability issue also depends on the amount of freedom you give to the agents in the market. So that sort of contradicts the decentralized nature of a blockchain system, but also we found that the scalability improved drastically when we kept these upper and lower bounds.
Okay, thank you very much. Again, question to the audience. Any more questions?
Just sorry, a brief question. Can you hear me? Yes.
Yes, we can.
Yes. I don't know whether you already answered this question, but what are the policy implication of your analysis, in the sense that what policymaker can do in order to support this kind of decentralization of energy supply, in your opinion?
Right. That is absolutely a very relevant question and absolutely a very interesting question here. So we did look at a few policies. So we at the moment are targeting the Indian market. So the Indian government actually has launched a solar rooftop program, which aims to generate around 40 gigawatts of energy by 2025, I believe. I'll have to fact check this, but I'm sure about the 40 gigawatts value. But we found some inefficiencies here in terms of the net metering policies, or the amount of electricity you're allowed to generate if you have a solar panel installed at your household. So based on our findings, we saw that, of course, India consists of a lot of states. So all states have different policies based on their electricity regulatory commissions. So some states did not allow the households to generate more electricity than they can consume, which I believe is very vague. So these policies certainly have to be addressed, and this was one thing that we wanted to propose through our results, that there is certainly some potential in the market. So policies like, allowing, talking through an Indian market perspective, firstly, allow households to generate more electricity than they can consume. And also, if the grid can also support these infrastructures, because there can also be some amount of profit that they can generate by buying excess of electricity amongst the sellers, because in an ideal case scenario, when the demand remaining is zero, there might be some electricity in excess amongst the sellers that they would like to sell to the grid. So some policies regarding that, and yeah, to name a few. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you for your answer.
Actually, the point that you raised is a very interesting one. And we see similar things here in Germany. And I think the main inhibitor or obstacle that we see in regulation at the moment is that much of energy regulation comes from the old times, the old energy economics, where you had the big producers and millions of consumers. And so the categorization of stakeholders in the energy market was just utilities and generators, or big consumers who could afford to have utility status.
We have to change completely the organization, technical and the economic organization of the energy system.
Exactly, and in the new world, everybody, we have the prosumers who, as Animesh said, produce more than they consume. So at least in Germany, they technically become utilities, which is completely crazy. And energy regulation has to adopt to the fact that suddenly it's not just the big Unipers and RWEs or the EDFs that are producing energy, but it's the small prosumers, and that has to be reflected. And it's interesting to see that even in India, this is a problem. So it's probably not just a European problem, but it's a global problem, that there is a need for a reform in energy regulation to adopt to the energy turnaround and the increased renewables in the system.
Right, precisely.
Sounds like a good closing remark.
Yes.
Jacques is already gone. I think they had problems with their internet connection. So Animesh, Francesco, thank you very much for your contributions and the interesting discussions. And we're closing this very much ahead of time, so everybody can grab some lunch before the next session start. I wish you all the best, and stay safe, stay healthy, and I hope to see you again next year, then hopefully in Italy live. Thank you very much. Have a good day.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
Everybody.